I represent a caucus that represents a lot of Nova Scotians, and so a lot of our work is to propose. And one of the things we always like to say is we'd be very happy for the government to steal our ideas. So we're happy that they have stolen some of those ideas recently. When we were in Amherst, one of the really exciting projects is affordable housing that has what they called shared equity. In our campaign platform, we had what we called rent-to-own starter homes. It's the same thing. Give people a path to home ownership. So, you give people a way to basically rent to own and keep that equity. And so that's really exciting. We're excited to see, lots of people have different opinions about the recent federal election, but we're glad to see that federal pharmacare program continue to roll out, to see more people eligible for dental care, and, still working to make sure that all the benefits of that program are available to Nova Scotians, because, of course, the diabetes care and the birth control that are a part of that agreement that many other provinces have access to, Nova Scotians don't yet. So pushing the health department to make sure that Nova Scotians have the same access to health care that other folks in the country have. And working hard to make sure that Nova Scotians' voices are represented. I know you were present at the announcement of the recent uranium leases, but, there's lots of folks, including folks like Robert Parker, who's the warden of Pictou, who are concerned that with the announcement of these RFPs that, local municipal officials and leaders weren't given even a heads up.
Yeah, on that point, you're right. I did take part in that press conference, and I had a question or two to ask about some of the other things relative to clean energy that we were talking about. But most of the Halifax-based media was looking at uranium mining and so on, and we know that there had been attempts to mine uranium in the past in Nova Scotia, and 3 locations across the province, Pictou County being one of them, as you mentioned, had identified that there was the very strong likelihood of being a profitable mining possibility. And so when the government announced it was opening up the possibility of prospecting or searching for mining opportunities, that's different from actually mining the stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't have a real problem with the prospecting idea, because you won't know what's under the ground until you kind of do what you have to do to find out. And if it is very lucrative, and I don't mean just for the mining company, but to the positive benefit of Nova Scotia generally and the community in particular, and more importantly, if it is absolutely safe to mine it, I don't have a problem with that. But we seem to have conflated this press conference about doing the prospecting, followed almost immediately by a license. And I'm thinking, wait a minute now, that's not quite what we talked about, is it?
Well, it is really what the government's talking about, Bill. So when the government talks about opening up for exploration, they immediately tie that to the kind of economic benefit that you're talking about. They talk about this as, an important key to our economy. I think you're making really good points. If it's safe, if there's benefit to Nova Scotians. But the fact is, we don't really have information on any of that. So it is important to understand what the resource is. I would argue that, like in the offshore, the government figured that out themselves. They did the mapping and then they put the leases out. We don't have a market partner. There has been no evidence in this conversation that there's someone out there looking to exploit this mineral, and we have a very weak royalty regime. So I think the question about what the benefit to Nova Scotians could be in decades, which is, as you heard, also what the government officials said, is really unclear. So I think we just have a lot of questions about that, and I think local folks have a lot of questions about that. And the reality is this government has been very clear that they want to expedite uranium mining, fracking, and critical mineral exploration. And, I think, of course, we have to look at economic benefit, We have to look at safety. We have to look at jobs in rural Nova Scotia. But I don't think there's been a really compelling argument made that this is going to be the magic bullet. And the reality is decades away, whatever possible economic benefit. But meanwhile, we have foresters and fishers and other folks in traditional industries right across this province who have growth opportunities now, who, clean energy is a growth opportunity now, particularly to feed our own grid. And we just don't see that same kind of rhetoric and ambition behind that. And I wish we did.
The one thing that bothers me about the way it seems to be unfolding is that the government made a particular point, and I was looking for it, and I heard it, and maybe I'm gullible, I believed it. But the particular point is that they made was there would be lots and lots and lots of public consultation, lots of public dialogue, lots of what do you think, should we or shouldn't we, and all that kind of thing. And I'm not feeling it. I'm hearing it, but I'm not feeling it. Is that your concern too?
Absolutely. And I think, aside from words, we have seen nothing to demonstrate that. Look, when they brought forward Bill 6 in the legislature, they hadn't even mentioned it to the Mi'kmaq chiefs in our province, and they have a duty to consult. So, there's lots of interpretations for what that means, but the fact that, the municipal wardens, that the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, the Mi'kmaq, there wasn't even a dialogue, there wasn't even a phone call before introducing this sweeping legislation does not bode well for the consultation. And in fact, what we've seen subsequently is a change in the environmental assessment process that gives the government less duty to engage in that kind of consultation with community. And we know that, when these bans came into place that have been lifted, whatever people think about that, that was the product of a lot of consultation, a lot of science, a lot of engagement. Those weren't actually easy decisions to make. Particularly the fracking one. And so I think, this is a government that's elected to represent the people of the province, not just a few people, all the people. And so they have a duty to consult on these issues. And I do not feel confident that I know that hasn't happened, and I don't feel confident that it will.
What kind of worries me a little bit is that when you talk about these things, it reminds me of an omnibus bill, whereby you maybe want to raise taxes or something, and you throw it in there with a whole bunch of other goodies totally unrelated, and you make this huge bill, and you either pass it all or get none. And
yep.
The conversation here started out, I thought, with opening up the prospect of letting companies go searching for the possibility of critical minerals and other things that could be useful in the green energy field or in the clean energy field. And we seem to have thrown in the other stuff at the same time, making it like an omnibus question. And that's what concerns me the most, is that, it was pretty clear that I was asking questions about the productivity and the possible boon to the local economy, whereas the Halifax media kept going back to uranium. And maybe I'm just being gullible on this, but, that was part of it. But to me, it was supposed to be a small part of it. And of course, we've already had an announcement about reopening of a gold mine in Guysborough County, for example. So that followed rather quickly, too.
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of omnibus bills. I think it is difficult. I think very much the way that this has been framed by this government is you support all of it or you support none of it, which I think discounts the intelligence of Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians can have different ideas about different things. You and I have talked about different feelings about fracking versus uranium or, the benefits of various things. And we have to have the opportunity to engage in all of that. And we're not given a lot of time to engage in all of that. So I think that's important. And we do see omnibus bills. The last legislative session was full of them. All of the conversation which you and I have had about the Auditor General and the FOIPOP and all of that was one bill. that just had a complete amalgam of random provisions in it. It's a terrible way to legislate. It's a terrible way to govern, and it doesn't give people the opportunity to understand the legislation going forward. Yeah. And that is, as you say, also happening when it comes to announcements. I think there's broad-based support for exploring for critical minerals. I think Nova Scotians understand the connection between the smartphones that they use every day and the water they drink and the computers they use, and geopolitical movements and the things that we're going to need. But we need to have information. Communities need information. We need to understand, and I don't think we're getting that.
And that's why we're here, of course. And this being a talk show, not a news program per se, you get to say opinions. And, I'm going to go out on a limb here. This might please you, I don't know. But if any government, whether it be Tim Houston's government or your government or any government, ever allows fracking in Nova Scotia, that will be the last days of that government. I just know it. People do not want fracking for any reason. So that I'll just make that statement and leave it there. I want to go somewhere else, though. You mentioned about the lack of consultation with the Mi'kmaq over some of these latest moves, and it caused me to think about what's going on in Alberta, where the Premier of Alberta is talking about a secession from Canada and kind of put the ducks in a row to lead to a possible plebiscite or vote to allow Albertans to decide. And the only real opposition that has come out thus far has been from the Indigenous community. And a few chiefs stood up and said, we have a document in our hands. It is a treaty with the Crown that this is our land, and you cannot just take Canada or Alberta and decide to join somewhere else or do something else. And from that, I'm thinking, we're seeing now the rest of the other shoe to fall, let me put it that way. With all of our effort toward reconciliation to the mistreatment, the horrible mistreatment over the centuries of the Indigenous community in Canada, how we just took the land and said, thank you very much, and go somewhere else, get out of sight and out of mind. Terrible. Now we're changing that, and it's changing dramatically, and it's changing fast. And I wonder sometimes if we are not ready or not wide enough awake yet to realize that when somebody wants to come along and do something that the Native community does not like, and it happens to oppose the ancient treaties, we may see that our savior will come from the Mi'kmaq community. Yeah,
I mean, I think we have captured this really well constitutionally, and I think, what's being expressed by First Nations in Alberta is actually not that different in kind than what's been expressed here and in lots of places, which is that duty to consult. But I also think that communities across our country have the same wish and desire. And I think, on the question of Alberta, I think it's incredibly dangerous what Premier Smith is doing. I know the Western premiers are meeting. I saw a comment by David Eby saying, this is foolishness and distraction at this moment when we need national unity. That's the right response. What we heard from Tim Houston, which was she's just being a premier, I think was the wrong response. For a premier who's so willing to sort of castigate Quebec, who, in their defense, at least have the argument of being a distinct nation with a distinct culture, to not call out Premier Smith for playing a very dangerous game, I think was a mistake. And I think this is a moment where we need national unity. I think this is a moment where we need a Team Canada approach. I think Canadians have shown in the last few months in ways that I think, as a politician are actually deeply moving and heartwarming, how much we are and wish to be a unified and collective country that, makes decisions on our own, that is not bound by our neighbors to the south and the mistakes that they make. I think you're right. I think in many ways we do have those First Nations voices that can act as reminders of that. But I think in many ways they're speaking for the collective.
Indeed, they are. And Canada is different. There's no question. We look to the south, we hear the rhetoric. We're nothing like that. And we don't want to be like that, except for a few. And I think Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, is one of them. And I really like the fact that one of the chiefs said that we appreciate your opinion. And if that's what you want, move. Don't change it. Just move. You just have to go a few miles to the south, and you've got exactly what you're talking about. And I welcome that, and I applaud that gratefully. But having said that, we're out of time, unfortunately, and I look forward to next month, and we'll get a chance to talk again. And appreciate the effort that you make. On behalf of Nova Scotians. I don't think people realize that our system only works with an effective opposition. And I think you're giving us that, and I thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate the opportunity to chat.